This is chapter 6, which is going to be talking about how to write good and neutral news messages. All right, so when we talk about what we call good news and neutral news messages, basically what these mean is the audience is not displeased to get this message. They're either happy about the news, something like you made your year-end bonus, or at the very least they're neutral about the news. Please give me some information about your company. We're thinking of hiring you for some work. So in either case, there's no resistance to them receiving the message and responding. So we can use the deductive approach, which basically means we state the main idea first, and then we provide some details to flesh out our message. Let's expand on this. So your key terms out of chapter 6, really we're going to focus in on, out of all the good news and neutral message types that are listed in this chapter, and there's several, we're going to focus in on the direct request for information, also called a routine request. And this is the bulk of what you'll probably be writing in business. And you're basically sending a message out, asking somebody to do something, a request, asking them to give you some information, or if it's employees that you're tasking, you're delegating some work out to them. And they're not going to be resistant to responding to that request. So for the direct request for information, or routine request, depending on which text you're working out of, there's some examples I've listed from the textbook on the third bullet point of this slide. So I gave you examples for both the current 9th edition of the text and the 8th edition if you're working off of an older text. Okay, here's your learning objectives for this week. Understand the deductive outline, which is the direct outline. The audience is not going to be displeased to receive the message. So we can start with the main idea. We're going to look at some of the other types of good news and direct message formats out of chapter 6, such as thank you notes and appreciation messages. And we're really going to focus in on this third learning objective, which is learning how to write routine requests and favorable responses to those requests. All right, let's dive in. So when we think about the different channels that we use in business communication, it can be face-to-face, it can be written, email, text, or a formal presentation, spoken. But the deductive organizational pattern is going to apply when the audience is not upset to receive the information. It could be good news, such as, hey, you made your year-end bonus. Or it can be, like I said earlier, neutral news. They're probably not going to have an emotional reaction, but they're going to comply with your request because it's basically part of their job. So in each of those instances, we're going to follow the deductive, meaning direct sequence, start with the main idea, and then provide supporting details to expand on that idea and get the reader motivated or informed enough to respond to your request. This slide lists all the different types of good news messages. The text spends a fair amount of time on those last three, order acknowledgments and then credit messages. We're not going to cover those too much. Those are more in the realm of kind of, typically those are form letters sent out through an accounting department. So we're not going to cover those a whole lot. The one that I'm really going to focus in on out of this chapter is that one right in the middle, routine requests. So, but there's also times when you're going to send out thank you messages, and there might be times when you have to make a routine claim inquiry, but we're going to focus in on routine requests. So here's an example of a good news message. In this case, a bank is telling its staff that they've enacted a casual dress policy that's going to start in July. And of course, the bank staff is going to be happy to receive that news. We don't have to wear suits and ties every day. So following the good news / neutral news deductive, i.e. direct format, we'll see that there should be an open, a body, and a close. And in the open, we expect them to state the main idea. And in the body, we expect them to provide some more details about the main idea. And in the closing, they're going to have any forward-looking information that the reader might need to know about that message. So as we look in the very first paragraph, what we expect to see is the main idea needs to be stated in that opening paragraph. And you can see here they say a casual dress policy has been approved for First National Bank and will be effective July 1st. That's the main idea. So they've stated it right there. It doesn't necessarily have to be the very first sentence of your message, but it needs to be stated in the first paragraph of your message. In the second paragraph, and in the table that follows that second paragraph, we expect to see some details about the good news. Tell us some more details about this new casual dress policy. So then they provide in the second paragraph a table that's introduced with the sentence to maintain our traditional professional image. And they have a table that sorts out what those guidelines are for men versus women. So tables, graphs, charts, pie charts, line charts, bar charts, and tables such as we see here are used very commonly in business writing. It's a way to condense information. If we were trying to put this in paragraph form, it would be much harder to read and digest that information. So this column format makes it very easy. If you're a man or a woman, you can pick your appropriate column and quickly ascertain what's acceptable as far as clothing that you need. So following that table, they have some more detailed information about what is not approved for clothing. And then in the closing paragraph, so we have the opening with the main idea. We have in the body, in the second and third paragraphs, they give some details about the new policy. And in the closing, they have any forward information that would be necessary for the reader of the letter. So they're giving an extension number that they can call and a website that they can reference if they have any questions. So there's an example of the deductive approach. Okay, here's the actual assignment type that you're going to be writing in week 7, a routine request, specifically a direct request for information. So direct meaning it's going to follow the deductive approach, put the main idea up front. And then the second part, request for information, you're asking somebody to give you some information, and the recipient of that letter is going to be happy or at least neutral to reply because it's probably going to mean potential business for them. Say, for example, you're a downtown San Diego hotel. You're the downtown Hyatt, big hotel, and you get a direct request letter from a company in the Midwest, and they're looking at coming out to San Diego in September to host their annual sales conference. And they need about 100 rooms, and they need some information about conference rooms and hosting special events and getting support with audio-visual equipment and dining and all that good kind of stuff. So as the hotel that's receiving this direct request for information, you're obviously going to be happy to comply and respond to this message because it's going to mean potentially some business for you. So as the writer of that message, you're that company in the Midwest that's considering coming out to the San Diego Hyatt, you know that you can write in the direct request for information format because the recipient is going to be happy to comply. You don't need to beat around the bush a lot and take a long time in getting to your actual request. You can state the request right up front. So with these requests, we assume that the request will be granted quickly and willingly without a lot of persuasion required, so we can follow the deductive sequence. All right, so let's take an example and evaluate this direct request message. So this is not a good example, but we know that with a direct request message, this is the structure, what I'm going to be talking about today, the structure that you want to follow in your direct request message is state the request in the first paragraph. In your second and third paragraphs, depending how much of a scenario you're responding to. In the second and or third paragraphs, you want to provide supporting details that the reader needs to respond to your request. Basically answering, what's in it for me as the reader? Like, why should I respond to this request? Are you serious? How do I know? And what is it that you actually need? And in the closing, you want to close with a specific next step and a deadline for that next step. So this example here, take a minute, and I'm going to pause here, ask you to pause the video. Take a minute to read this example and note a couple things that are wrong with this example. If you haven't already, go ahead and pause the video now and read the letter. Okay, now that you've read it through, what are a couple things that you noticed were wrong with this direct request letter? Well, the first thing is they didn't get the request out in the first paragraph, right? They start out with some extraneous detail. I stopped by the construction site. You appear to be well ahead of schedule. Okay. You need to get the request out in the very first paragraph. The actual request doesn't show up until the third paragraph near the end. If you go to your third paragraph, and on the third line of that third paragraph, he says, I respectfully request that the two 30-gallon units be removed and that 50-gallon water heaters be installed in all the apartments. That's the actual request. They've kind of buried it here in the third paragraph. So that should be in the very first paragraph. The other thing that is not ideal with this direct request message is they spend a lot of time with a bunch of detail that's not really relevant according to our agreement. They can just say, as you know, our agreement specified 50-gallon heaters, not 30-gallon heaters, but they spend too much time laboring on that point. And then the third piece that isn't ideal is the closing. Thank you for your consideration. This matter is kind of a cliche closing. So you want to give them an actual specific deadline, specific next step. Please replace all the water heaters. Please follow up and let me know when the water heaters will be replaced. Email me at nsharf@miracosta.edu by August 15th, right? So you're letting them know, what do you need to do with this request? How do you want me to respond? And when do you need me to respond by? So this is not a good example. They have the inductive outline, meaning they have a bunch of detail first and not the main idea. They bury the request in the third paragraph. Okay, different scenario, but a better example of a direct request. So this is figure 6.5 in your textbook. And you can view this on page 105 of the 9th edition of your textbook. Now, this is a memo, an email specifically. Your writing assignment, you're writing a letter. That means it's going to have the 7 parts of the letter. That's explained in the week 7 materials. Make sure that you read that accompanying document that spells out what the 7 parts of a letter are. And that's also towards the back of your book in one of the key cards at the back of the book. So that's explained in the week 7 module. So make sure you understand the 7 parts of a letter before you do the week 7 writing assignment. This sample is in memo, an email. We're writing an actual letter. So just know that distinction. But the actual body of the letter, if you look at the actual content of the letter, trying to point to it here, it's got all those pieces here of the main ideas up front in the opening paragraph. It's got supporting details, and it's got closing next steps on what they need them to do. So let's look at this example. In the very first sentence, they ask, please repair or send us a replacement for the broken laptop computer. So they're stating the request right out front. That's clear. And then in the second paragraph, we see they provide an explanation that the computer was purchased 3 months ago under our agreement, and that it's still under contract for repair. And then in the closing, our salesperson, Mario Cavetti, awaits the return of his laptop. I would actually say that that closing should be stronger, and it needs a specific next step and a deadline for that next step. So please follow up via email to Mario Cavetti by April 15th, 2018, something to that effect. So that's the piece that I would add to this. So again, this is a book example. Okay, so that's chapter 6, the good news and neutral news messages with the focus on the direct request message. And we want to remember that the deductive sequence begins with the main idea up front, first paragraph, followed by supporting details. All right, Thank you for listening.